Nothing contained in this podcast should be considered a substitute for professional medical advice. This content does not represent our respective employers and is purely the opinion of the podcast hosts. We are not your personal medical providers. Sorry, friends. So, if you have any questions or concerns or seeking advice, diagnosis, and or treatment, please seek individual, personalized advice from a healthcare provider in your area. We are not liable for any risks or issues associated with using or acting upon the information contained in this podcast. This is intended for educational and entertainment purposes only, so enjoy the ride. Welcome to Medical Media Mixer, the perfect cocktail. I'm Nicole Peniston, licensed psychologist.
And I'm Tara Prisco, physician assistant. All right, I think it's time. It is episode 10.
10, that's a big hallmark for us, guys.
For reals.
Yeah.
So in real life time, it is 2 days after Valentine's Day.
It is. What did you guys do for Valentine's Day?
Well, actually, on Valentine's Day, one child had practice. We had just tacos and watched, with the other child, I watched a movie. I watched that Enchanted. You know the one where like the princess comes into the New York City? It's really cute. And then last night we went out to dinner. And the kids went to this parents' night out thing at the gym. So, yeah, it was an easy night for all. Nothing too exciting.
At the restaurant?
So, it was like a prefix, and I won't name the restaurant, but if the prefix...
It wasn't that good.
It was okay, but for the money, what it was, it was like $139 for like the appetizer, the meal, and the dessert. If it was that per couple, amazing. If it's that per person... not so much. I would have expected a little more elevated, you know?
Fair.
Like, you know what I mean? Like, I understand it's Valentine's and everything's trumped up prices, but it was good. But it wasn't like, you know. But it was close by. It was convenient. The timing worked out. So it was still time without people interrupting us.
I mean, that is invaluable. That's priceless.
Did you do any fun events? I know you had tagged a bunch of things on Facebook, and I was like waiting to hear if you did anything.
There was like a Galentine's Day thing on Thursday night that none of my friends could go to, but it sounded fun. It was like at a local mall. It was like you got to like taste some wines, and they had like permanent jewelry, and like it seemed like a fun thing to just like go and like, you know, make new friends possibly. But there was a little snafu at work, and so I didn't get out on time. And then by the time I did get home, I would have had to rush, and I was just like, it's whatever. And then on actual Valentine's Day, I had to go to the heart doctor. So which everything was fine. And then I had enough time to stop and have breakfast with my mom because the appointment was at the butt crack of dawn. So we went and had breakfast. And then I came home and did some work. And then I got my nails did. I heard you got your nails done too. Let's see them.
I did. I went very, very subtle. It's just literally like sheer pink. That's it.
Mine are just...
you got a little bling. A little silvery.
Yeah. They're opal chrome.
Oh, opal chrome. See, I don't think it shows up as well. I have to see them in person.
I bought a beautiful light to help.
Oh.
And it doesn't work, so I have to return it.
Oh, darn. You know what, actually, when you had sent me the little podcast book thing for Christmas, I was looking to send you actually a light, and it wasn't going to get there in time, and it was just not going to happen. But that was like my thought, too, like something podcast related.
Yeah. We'll get it. We got time.
So just Valentine's, Galentine's. Do you remember our epic Galentine's party we did back at my apartment when I was like, we were like 25-ish and I lived in Roselle Park.
Okay.
And I lived with Laureen and Chrissy, and everybody came, and I think Sue, everybody was there. Laura, I don't know if Laura was there, but Chrissy was there because Jeff was away. It was a whole big thing. Do you remember we had like the penis cake?
Was that when we took the field trip to several different places?
No, I think that was a different day. This was all contained within the apartment. That was a different time. It's okay. We could tell our listeners we went to various strip clubs one time and argued with them that we didn't need to play a cover because we were chicks.
Adventure. We met some wild people that night.
That was an interesting night. No, this other one.
We went in like the afternoon to strip clubs.
I don't remember. It's like so long ago and so vague, but the one I was just laughing because it was just us girls hanging out. We made that penis cake and we were just drinking and, you know, chilling, and it was just fun. It was just silly.
A lot of good times at that place.
Yeah, it was like 1 year, but I feel like a lot of memories are packed into that one particular year.
I remember your exercise machine.
That was Laureen's exercise machine. We used to call it the sex machine. You
I
were doing
remember
the motion
singing
too.
karaoke at your
Yes.
place by myself, just at the top of my lungs singing.
Now we're, old and boring and like,
No, no, we're not old and boring. We just need to schedule those fun times now. They're not so impromptu anymore.
True. We have actual responsibilities.
Yeah. Well, I think we should schedule like a fun like girls' day.
I think so. I think we're due. So we have to make something and plan it out.
Yes.
All right. So we ready to rock?
I'm ready if you are.
All right. I have a cocktail for us. It is called the Code Blue.
Ooh.
And it goes against everything I believe in because I don't normally drink blue beverages or eat blue candies. I don't know why. It's just the
I didn't know you had these staunch beliefs about the color blue.
I don't know. I guess there was a lot of blue raspberry stuff when we were younger, and I just wasn't a fan. And so I just made it
flavor.
I just made it a line in the sand that I won't have anything with fake blue. I don't really know why. I stuck with it all these years. This is the first time in probably 20 something years that I'm having something fake blue. So I hope it tastes good.
Okay.
All right. So it has a 1/4 cup of cranberry juice, which is 2 ounces if you're doing ounce math versus cup math. 1 ounce of citron vodka, 1 ounce of blue curacao, and 1 tablespoon of lime juice. First, you want to use your lime to wet your martini glass and rim it with some sugar, and then shake up everything else in a shaker and pour it into your glass. I sent you a picture already, but I will bring it on camera. It is blue.
Really? Well, you used blue curacao before. It just made a purple drink.
Well, I didn't use it. I think I didn't have it, and I used like some blueberry thing.
Okay.
So that was the difference that time. Actually, it tastes pretty yummy.
It looks pretty.
So I like it.
Nice.
All right. So the show I'm covering today is this is the first kind of new show I think we're doing. Well, I guess that documentary was new-ish.
Well, my show is new too, so we're on theme.
Nice. So St. Denis Medical. So it's a comedy, and I watched the first 8 episodes. I literally just binged it. So this isn't about particularly one episode, but sort of the whole vibe of the show. So basically, it's a mockumentary type sitcom. So it's filmed very similarly to The Office or Parks and Rec, or I think the maker of this, he also did Superstore. There's another one about retail. So it's filmed in that similar way, which is a lot of fun. I do enjoy shows like that. And it came out in November, but in January they renewed it for a second season. So there will definitely at least be 2 seasons. So I watched the first 8 episodes, and I think it appeals to pretty much anybody, like any of these sort of workplace comedies do. But I think people who work in medicine will just, some of the very, spot on accuracies will definitely entertain you even a little bit extra. It has a kooky cast of characters, and they usually solve some issues around the hospital. They also cause some issues around the hospital. But, in the end, sort of, you note that they all genuinely hope to help the patients get better. And the one main character, which is Nurse Alex, she is very similar. If anyone's watched Parks and Rec, Leslie Knope, she's overworked, control freak. She fears her absence may literally cause the hospital to explode. And she's a flawed character who really, actually, in the end, longs to do the right thing. So it's a nice, again, Leslie Knope is literally one of my favorite characters of all time. So this definitely spoke to me. Couple other main characters. Yeah, I know. Amy Poehler's amazing. So the main characters, there's a couple others. So there's Joyce, who is the executive director. So she's the admin, basically. And she's a former surgeon, but now she's taking on the admin persona. Then there's Alex, that we already spoke about. Bruce, who's a cocky trauma surgeon. So that totally fits that, trope, basically, tough guy, cocky surgeon. Then there's Serena, who's a self-assured, younger travel nurse with a little bit of a wild streak. Then there's Matt, who's this newly hired, fresh-faced nurse who moved, I believe this takes place in Oregon, Washington State. Where is this supposed to be? But anyway, he moved from Montana, from a deeply religious community, and he's like a fish out of water. And then good old David Allen Greer plays Ron, the curmudgeonly emergency physician. So he's kind of like been there, done that, But in the end, again, he's always sort of doing the right thing.
Yeah. Love
and
him.
Then is Val, who's a nurse administrator, and she's kind of a surly, no-nonsense veteran. So, the show, as you'd expect, there's different exaggerated character types that we just went along, who work alongside each other, despite their flaws. They all really work to do the right thing. So there's a lot of tender, little heartfelt moments sprinkled in with the comedy. And it does poke fun at a lot of common healthcare issues, especially things like being overworked and understaffed. The administrator's goals and initiative versus the healthcare workers and what they want, what they're trying to accomplish. And they have, these little tropes associated with different roles in the system. One of my favorites, I don't remember which episode it was, like I said, because I watched 8 in a row, because it's like a 30-minute comedy, so it's easy to digest. They called it the Filipino Mafia. It was all these Filipino nurses who only scheduled themselves to work together and on the same team. And it was like Alex trying not to call them out, but at the same time trying to split them up because she needed staff elsewhere. And it was like walking this funny line. But I love my Filipino nurses. I've worked with so many over the years. They are absolutely the best. And it was just so cute because it's true, like they kind of stick together, teamwork. So it was just really cute. But all in all, in the end, the show embodies that camaraderie. People at the core are in healthcare for the right reason. So what I wanted to talk about more than any particular diagnosis was healthcare workers and their happiness. Right.
Wow. We could.
Yeah. Or lack of. So I took a look at a couple different studies over time, and a couple of them are prior to COVID, and one of them specifically is after COVID. So it was quite interesting.
I'm sure there's a shift.
Yeah. So first one I looked at was something called Determinants of Happiness Among Healthcare Professionals between 2009 and 2019. It was a systematic review. And basically what they were looking for is, what are the individual and organizational determinants of healthcare professionals' happiness, and how can they be applied to happiness-related policies and strategies? So this is not giving you pizza as your reward for being a healthcare worker.
Well, I'm making a face because I distinctly remember there being large organizational-wide discussions regarding self-care and work-life balance pre-COVID. And all of those disappeared and are not part of the workplace anymore.
Right.
So, go on.
So basically, this study, they looked at cross-sectional studies, intervention studies, and qualitative studies. So they looked at a bunch of different ways that these were conducted. They basically came to the conclusion that happiness is a significant component of healthcare professionals actually functioning optimally in the workplace.
Which I would imagine it probably happens in a lot of workplaces as well.
Of course. But we're dealing with life and death here, so I sure hope that we take care of our people. So they took a look at recent literature, and it seemed that individual and organizational determinants are not mutually exclusive, but basically function together to achieve professional happiness. And they're saying that they need to basically come up with a collaborative approach between the healthcare professional and the healthcare authorities at different levels. And this isn't just admin saying, we're going to make you happy by doing this. It's really listening to what the people on the ground have to say. So what they're suggesting is health policymakers should consider continuously increasing the happiness of healthcare professionals, because it improves the quality of healthcare delivery and outcomes. So actual outcomes, and which you'll see in some of these other studies, they've actually measured patient outcomes alongside the happiness, and you'll see the difference. So the next one I looked at was a 2020. It was Association of Care Workers Job Satisfaction and Global Happiness. And this is the one where they took the outcomes with the functional performance of severely disabled elderly residents in nursing homes. So this is actually in Japan. It wasn't a U.S. study. But they showed that there was absolutely an observable correlation between staff happiness and the actual functional deterioration of the patients. And so, of course, happy staff, healthy, happy patients, not happy staff, not healthy, happy patients.
I guess my first question is about that. Makes perfect sense, obviously, that would correlate. But I also wonder how they operationally define happiness specific to that culture. Because I think happiness varies from culture to culture, how we define it. And I think it varies from person to person as well. And I think those definitions may change over time. I think what made someone happy working in healthcare pre-COVID was probably different than what makes them happy now.
I agree. And at the end, I'll go through a couple of the recommendations, and they come from a couple different places, and you'll see they're slightly different. So basically, they're saying that organizational culture in a nursing home will promote maintenance of the functional performance of the actual patients. And the high quality care lead to residents' favorable outcomes and functional performance. So we're saying, I'm sure when they're saying functional performance, they're talking about the patient's ability to do their activities of daily living, things like that. Another 2017 study, Compassion, Mindfulness, and the Happiness of Healthcare Workers, and they found an independent and strong relationship between aspects of self-compassion, so mindfulness and coping with isolation, with the perceived happiness of healthcare workers. And basically, they said that implementing training programs to increase a sense of community and awareness of emotion, so that's a little bit what you spoke of, may be an important first step. So that was that pre-COVID 2017, taking a look at that awareness of our emotions of the people who are actually working in these jobs. So again, pre-COVID, we're trying, everything's great. And before I dive into the actual COVID one, I think that COVID, of course, gave a lot of healthcare workers sort of a version of PTSD, right?
Definitely.
And
I also think the ask of COVID was so much different than, at least here in the US, that we've ever had to encounter. People have worked in infectious disease. They've worked in trauma situations. They worked in war zones, but it has never been something where you could literally die at any minute with any person. And I think that risk felt so much more real for a lot of healthcare workers. And they, especially in the beginning, I remember people could not go back to their homes. They had to stay in hotels or things like that. And so I think just the risk level probably changed the way a lot of healthcare workers perceived their job and their happiness and how they're valued at their job and what wants to keep them there.
Exactly. I understand this was something that was unprecedented, and I don't think this is all the admins or their fault or all the structure of medicine. I think everyone was scrambling their best, but I do think that it was sort of a perfect storm in that healthcare, the way we do healthcare, was leading up to this very structured click box approach where you're not just talking to the patient and taking care of them, but the paperwork that you have to do and how many clicks and surveys and things you have to, measure the patient for this and that. The other thing became very burdensome leading up to this. And then this sort of just
evidence-based care as dictated by insurance companies mostly, which, makes sense. We want to make sure that the care that we're delivering works. But I think that added more stressors to the non-patient, direct patient care part of the job for a lot of folks.
Right. I mean, the way when I first entered healthcare, the way it worked was very much still a fee for service. You documented your notes, and on my end, if I documented a certain amount of review of systems, history, physical exam findings, complexity of what their diagnosis and the plan was, and or time spent with the patient, you build based on that, right? Mm-hmm. So how much you did in the visit. It then shifted to these evidence-based, which is amazing, wonderful, but it became more of a click box. So as a company, if we have a certain amount of patients who we've done their depression screening, their fall screening, their nutritional screening, their this, their that, check, talked about their flu shot, then at the end of the year as a company, because you're providing more preventative care, again, which is great, you get paid more based on that, right? but it became this click box thing. And like, I'm in primary care, so I sort of get that. But why does my GI office need to know when my flu shot was or if I had my mammogram? You know what I mean? So they're also subject to all these click boxes, which really aren't pertinent to what they're doing.
And in my notes too, I think it's important for me to know a lot of health history and things like that, family history, but like I have to ask about medication allergies. I'm not a prescriber, but if I don't click that box, then it'll come back as flagged by insurance or saying, oh, your notes are not comprehensive. And so, that's one question, but I'm sure as you see, the amount of those click boxes, the amount of that information that we have to gather, that's taking away from addressing why the person is sitting in front of you. It's taking away from the quality of time that you can spend with them focused on the true issue for these more business type, payment type issues.
Right. And I've also seen, the insurance down now putting restrictions on how long a patient can be admitted to the hospital. If they go back in for that same diagnosis within a certain period of time, that hospital gets dinged or that nursing home gets dinged because, well, they ended up sick again under your watch. So now we don't pay you for the work you're doing. Not every time is that related to you. There are other factors. So there's just a lot of pressure.
But do you have limits on the amount of time spent with each individual patient per meeting?
So in my practice, I have 30-minute slots scheduled for new patients, yearly physicals, and pre-ops and hospital follow-ups. Everything else is scheduled at 15. But I may, on one of those 15-minute slots, see someone for 5 minutes for a cold, and then I may spend longer on a different patient. So it all sort of balances. Nobody's kicking me out of the room, and I'm able to be flexible in that way in my own office.
Right. And I ask that because I think a lot of listeners who maybe are just on the patient end of things don't understand why, they make an appointment and they feel like they only get 15 minutes with their doctor. It's really, that's all that we're allowed to be scheduled, or that's all that we're allowed to be paid for. It's not like we don't care or we don't want to spend additional time with you. There are limits imposed on us on what we can do per person. And so I think maybe some patients having that understanding of that side of things might help some things go a little bit better, especially if, there's a lot of people who haven't been to doctors in years. And then they come in and they're like, I only get 30 minutes with you. And on our end, we want more than 30 minutes with you. But This is what we can provide. This is what we're allowed to provide. And it's frustrating on both ends. It's frustrating for both of us.
And some of that time is, remember, our documentation has to be built in there somewhere. I mean, a lot of the time is also built in. My medical assistants are amazing and they do a lot of that extra work for me.
Right.
So I'm very fortunate. I can't complain, and I'll talk about that at some point, but I am not an unhappy healthcare worker. So.
I'm very happy in my current position where I'm at. And with psychology, it's a little bit differently, especially with the type of work that I do where I can bill separately for documentation. But, there's still limits on that. And a lot of times, as many patients, I don't think they do know, just because we bill for something doesn't mean the insurance company pays us.
Correct.
So that is also something that we need to kind of keep into account when we're seeing people is, is this going to get covered? Is it going to get bounced back? Is a bill going to get sent to the patient for this?
Right.
So we have to juggle a lot of balls when we're working with someone. They're not all just about talking about the presenting problem.
Yeah.
And all right. So to the happiness like you're talking about.
Exactly.
Satisfaction.
Right. So this COVID study, all right, so a longitudinal study of hospital workers' mental health from fall 2020 to the end of the COVID-19 pandemic in 2023. So what's interesting about this is they found that the pattern of change over
1 second. They said the COVID pandemic ended in 2023?
Yeah, end of 23.
Just only because a lot of us in workplaces, we were told it was ended much earlier than that.
Yeah. I mean, so that's what they're using as their parameters. But basically, they found that the pattern of change over time varied in different measures of mental health. But they did see that at the end of this, that the measures of mental health were not improving at the end of the pandemic, even though the rate of hospitalizations decreased. So initially, the healthcare workers' emotional health sort of matched the hospital caseloads, right? So caseloads are high, people are unhappy. But at the end, when things started to dribble off and there were less hospitalizations and less of a concern, the healthcare workers did not recover at the end of that.
Right. Probably because some of that administrative stuff didn't shift with the reduction of hospitalizations.
Yeah. So, basically like what I just said, this emotional exhaustion, as they're quoting it, rose and fall in synchrony with the case rates. But then at the end, unfortunately, we all hung on to some of that. And they seem that in nurses in particular, that they actually increased in their emotional exhaustion even after the pandemic ended.
Yeah, because if you're thinking it from like a trauma focused lens, this is chronic trauma. It's not a one-time incident. COVID didn't happen on one day and then end. This happened day after day after day after day for years. And even if you're not treating someone with COVID or under those restraints and that stress right now, it didn't go away. It was never addressed.
Right. And a big part of this also was we had a steep decline in the actual healthcare workforce during this time. So everyone says you can't hire anybody in healthcare. It's been dire. I mean, we're not fully staffed.
Well, and the part that I think a lot of people don't talk about, some of that decline was because a lot of our fellow healthcare workers died from COVID.
Absolutely. Or the toll was too big and they made a decision not to come back.
Mm-hmm.
So, basically that the psychological distress is comprised of depressive and anxiety symptoms, and it can be used as a screening test for possible cases of actual diagnosable depressive and anxiety disorders. Rising psychological distress over time may be due to longer-term mental health problems in the hospital staff, and likely secondary to the impact of chronic stress and chronic exhaustion. Mm-hmm. And PTSD symptoms peaked in the first year and did decline. So it wasn't clearly just PTSD, but other lingering psychologic conditions.
Right. And from like my field, we talk about capital T trauma and little t trauma. So that could be more of the little t trauma coming into play long term because you're still in the field. Maybe you're okay with COVID now and not so traumatized by that, but that doesn't mean there's not other difficult things that you're dealing with day to day.
Exactly. So, in the end, I guess we say, well, what can we do? What can we do to improve well-being? So I looked at a couple different things. One is actually a consulting company, Comp Health. I've heard of them before. Mm-hmm. So this is what they'll tell the administrators because they're right. They're the consulting company. Administrators call them in, like, what can we do to make people happy? So basically, everything's going to be linked in the show notes, but they actually do have some little infographics about, happiness pre-pandemic and today. And then in the end, basically they say, number one, reduce administrative burden. Well, yeah. 2, create a better work-life balance. 3, focus on respect and recognition, which is important, but sometimes it feels like they're just going through the motions, right? Because we could take a picture for our Instagram giving you flowers for your recognition as the whoever award recipient. And enhance your organization's workplace culture. I mean, that's a very broad statement. But yes, the day-to-day is more important, right? On the day-to-day culture versus like, oh, we gave you pizza and we gave so-and-so flowers. Day-to-day is.
Well, I feel like the day-to-day makes the longer lasting impact too.
Right.
Where, if you feel happy to go in every day and you're happy with your coworkers and happy with your expectations and feel like you can manage it, that's going to lead to longevity versus you get pizza once a month.
Right. And this one is actually specifically speaking about physicians, but it says facilitate greater freedom and autonomy, because I do think that is a big cultural change in medicine, where it's no longer the provider or physician making all of these decisions, but they are somewhat dictated by what is available in your facility, what your formulary is, what your restrictions are with who you can consult or what tests you can order. Mm-hmm. So some of the autonomy is taken away from the providers. So they're saying freedom and autonomy in the workplace to feel more empowered. So that was coming from the, like I said, the consultant side of things. And then I took a look at the American Academy of Family Physicians, which is supposed to be physicians. So hopefully that's a little bit more on coming from the correct perspective. So what they were focusing more on was having a sense of mission and identity, knowing what drives you to work and come to work every day. Their second was a direction. So what does your career path look like? What are your goals? Their third was family, which is important because we do lose that sometimes if you're so into your career. Fun. I'm not sure how they plan on implementing that, but sure.
I'm laughing because at a place I used to work, they had a fun committee. And
Oh.
the first things that got cut after.
And then the last is finances. Yes, pay us sufficiently. Yes.
Which, and to be fair, it is not always up to, the practice or the hospital administrators. A lot of that pay is dictated by insurance companies.
Right. And the last thing, we look at is if you've ever heard of the website Kevin MD, this is an opinion piece that was thrown on there. It's not a study. It's not a specific recommendation, but they're saying to connect with your patients on a personal level, which I do find is very fulfilling and is a very important part of my happiness. Practicing self-care. So don't get consumed by everything, but also make sure you're able to take care of yourself. I know we all put that last,
Easier
but
said than done.
Rest, exercise, eat healthy, all those things. Find gratitude in your work.
Mm-hmm.
So look at the positive aspects and find joy sort of in the successes. Foster a positive work environment, which you don't always have control of, but I guess you and the people you directly work with, you can kind of bring that in there, and hopefully everybody on your team at least is feeling good. And then just to continuously learn and grow, to continue your self growth, your growth as a professional. So, I see all of these things that everybody's saying, how to implement them. I'm not really sure that there's one way to implement this for everybody. And then there was one last article I'll link. I'm not going to go into too much detail, but it was from a Canadian Medical Association journal. And similarly, find purpose, wellness and balance. This one talks a lot about how doctors specifically tend to be perfectionists and that stoicism is not great. I don't know if that's necessarily true anymore. This article was a little, to me, sounded outdated. But it touched on some of the other things, having a purpose and a direction and things like that.
Well, I could also argue, well, don't you want your doctor to be a perfectionist? Don't you want him to do everything right?
Of course. I guess they're saying it hurts yourself. They're saying as a provider, it hurts you if you're too stuck in that.
Oh, of course. Yeah. But I think part of it is also an expectation.
Yeah. I mean, as far as, just reflecting on my own journey in medicine, I feel my first job, I was a cog in the system. I think my patients and I, we did well and I had staff, but in the end, it was about a numbers game, seeing as many patients as you can. And at the end of the day, that's what your value was. I do find that the practice I work for now, which I've been at for, it'll be 18 years in August, which is absolutely insane. But I've worked through many different aspects of this practice, and it was very flexible when I had children to my lifestyle. So I worked in the offices, traditional primary care. I did for quite a few years nursing homes only. Mm-hmm. So I was on my own schedule. I would come and go as I'd please. And my practice still, I was employed by them. But there I was able to witness some of that admin coming down, pressure, the way healthcare has changed on the people who work there. But it was also influencing me in that, well, sorry, insurance isn't going to allow you to keep this patient here for subacute rehab a little bit longer. They say they've reached a plateau and they need to be discharged, even though there's no discharge plan or safe place for them to go. So I did witness a lot of that, and that was very tough. Or an admin saying, why are you sending this patient back to the hospital? They just came, and I'm like, well, do you want them to die here? Because they're going.
Yeah.
And I did also see a little bit of this when I did the medical consults at the inpatient psychiatric unit, because I was in an actual hospital. So again, similar pressures, placements of patients, things like that. But all in all, I have been very fortunate. I'm still in a private practice that is not owned by a hospital, which is so rare.
That's wild.
My practice has grown. My boss has grown from me, him, and a couple of medical assistants in a teeny tiny little office literally attached to a house to owning, I don't even know, 10 plus offices, including 2 urgent cares, an aesthetics business, hospitals, nursing homes, all of this. So I've grown there and have felt respected, and I felt that I was valued. So I'm very lucky to stay in my bubble as long as I possibly can.
Yeah.
And, hopefully the outside pressures from how he can do business and how he is reimbursed as a practice continues to make that available to us to continue, for all of us to continue to be happy. So that's it for me. So not so much diagnosis based today, but I think it's important. And obviously you have a lot, of understanding in these depression and PTSD and all these things that come from working in healthcare. So I think it's a nice little perspective from both of us.
Yeah, definitely.
And that's it.
Okay. So today, I'm not necessarily talking about a diagnosis in the negative sense. I think a lot of people think once we diagnose someone with something, it's a problem. Today, I'm going to talk about IQ. And so the name of my drink is IQ. IQ stands for intelligence quotient, just in case people were wondering what IQ stands for. So
Got it.
my drink here doesn't look that fancy. It is called the IQ. It is 1.5 ounces of vodka, 0.5 ounces of honey syrup, 4.5 ounces of grapefruit juice, orange zest, and ice cubes. I didn't have orange zest, sorry. So what you do is you fill a highball glass with ice to the top, and then you pour in the honey syrup and the vodka. You top it up with the grapefruit juice, and you stir gently and enjoy. And it really just tastes like grapefruit juice to me. But I like grapefruit juice, so it's delicious.
There you go. Interacts with a lot of medications, though.
It does. And luckily, the medications I was on that I was not able to drink grapefruit juice with, I'm not currently taking them because I do enjoy grapefruit juice. So I was glad to be able to have this drink to that. So the show I'm going to talk about is a new show also, and it is called High Potential. It's on Hulu, produced by ABC. If you guys didn't know, Hulu is owned by ABC. And it is actually based on a French show called Haute Potential Intellectuelle. So same thing, High Potential. And basically both shows are the exact same plots, just one is in French and, has a French context, where this one is set in the US. So I'm really just going to talk about the US version of it. But the French version is available on certain streamings if you can get streaming from other countries. So the show it premiered in September 2024, and in January was renewed for a second season, just like your show. So both shows are pretty popular. So this show centers on Morgan, who's a single mom. She's got 3 kids, and she starts off as a cleaning lady in the LAPD. And in the first episode, she's dancing around and cleaning, and she accidentally knocks over a box of files, and you see her looking at the pictures, and it's like a Beautiful Mind style, connecting the dots with red strings. And she goes over, they have like a big like evidence whiteboard, and she goes over and she writes on the whiteboard, and she leaves and goes home. And then the next day they come in and they're like, who the hell wrote on the whiteboard? What the heck? So they look at the surveillance cameras and they see that she wrote on it. So they bring her in, and essentially she comes to help them solve this crime. And that's kind of what the whole show is about, is they see that she has these skills. And so first they hire her as a consultant. And then that kind of her role progresses throughout the first season. So Morgan is played by Caitlin Olsen from Always Sunny in Philadelphia. And then there's some other characters, some other faces you may recognize. Specifically, Judy Reyes plays Selena. She's the head of LAPD's Major Crimes, and you've seen her on shows like Scrubs and things like that.
Yeah, I know her. I'm doing Scrubs as another episode, so.
Nice. So yeah, we'll get to talk about Judy again. She's a great actress. I love her. So in the very first episode, when they bring Morgan in, they're like, why the heck did you do this? What is going on? You're messing with our investigation. They pretty much are kind of like crapping on her. They're like, you're just a cleaning lady. Like, what the hell? And then Selena, who's the head of Major Crimes, she kind of like, basically Morgan storms out. She's like, screw you guys. And Selena follows her, and she's like, how do you do that? And she just like offhand says, she's like, oh, I have like 160 IQ. And basically Judy's like, well, I know a lot of like smart people, but like not smart like that. And like, she didn't necessarily mean the number of the IQ. She meant like the skills that she was seeing Morgan evidence. And so in this first episode, some of those skills you're seeing are very quick processing speed. So she's looking at information, processing it correctly immediately, and coming up with an answer within seconds. She's very detail oriented. She's very sarcastic, which studies have shown is correlated with high IQ. And then she has advanced cognitive abilities. And so basically she says, that she doesn't say that she is called high IQ or that she's in Mensa or anything like that a lot of people colloquially associate with high IQ. She says she's considered a high potential intellectual. So that's something a little different. And so I thought that was really interesting to explore what that means. So a high potential intellectual means that somebody has a lot of skills, but they may not be using those skills. So she's got a super high IQ, but she's a cleaning lady.
Right.
So she's got these skills, but something has gone on that where she hasn't been able to necessarily apply those skills. And I thought that was really important because there's a lot of people out there in the world who are extremely intelligent, but they may not be in positions of intelligence.
Right.
And that those factors have to do a lot with socioeconomic status, access, availability, things like that. But I really wanted to delve more into what it means to be a high potential intellectual. Well, what Morgan says in that first episode is that even though she's got, photographic memory, intellectual creativity, all that good stuff, some great visual spatial reasoning and memory, she also has downfalls. She says that she obsesses over problems. Her mind's constantly spinning. She can't sleep at night sometimes because she's like kind of caught up in solving a puzzle or solving a situation. She's had conflicts in relationships. She's lost jobs. She has a hard time having conversations with people because she's kind of processing 10 steps ahead of where someone else is. And so it's hard to even just like sit and talk with someone sometimes for her. And she also alludes to having been arrested multiple times in the past, which we see at one point. She gets a little feisty with some police officers and gets arrested. She does get physical with them. But in this interaction, you kind of see where this police officer is making an assumption. She's already jumping ahead 10 steps to saying, you're wrong, this is what's happening. But then, of course, if you're telling a cop who's already upset that you're wrong, they're going to get more upset. And so her emotional IQ,
Right.
and they don't really talk too much about that. They talk a little bit about some emotional issues and struggles that she's had due to trauma in the past, which I'm not going to cover too much. But you can kind of see that emotional intelligence doesn't always equate to the same level of her intellectual intelligence. Intellectual intelligence is the same word. You know what I mean.
Right.
Mm-hmm. So that's kind of what goes on in the show. Other things that pop up is that she has 3 kids. One is, I believe she's 16, her 16-year-old daughter, who seems to be relatively average. She's not disabled in any way. She doesn't have any significant problems, but she's definitely not as high IQ or high intellectual potential as her mother. But then her middle child, her son, is right on par with her. And so they do a lot of kind of intellectual chess playing, she brings home a bunch of evidence, which obviously she's done. Her son goes through it with her. There's one point where he wants to go play a video game and she's like, well, write me a 1,000-page paper on the ethics of video games first. And he's like, okay, I'll be right back. And like, he's fine with that. So you can see that like her son is definitely at the same level that she is. But her daughter and most people that she meets are not there. And so there's some issues with her relationship with her daughter that are somewhat related to that intellectual level not being the same. There is a part where the daughter is basically like, I'm not like you. I'm not like anyone, because her father's not in the picture, which is a big plot line. I'm not going to go into that. But there is a genetic link to intelligence.
Right. I was going to ask that. I just didn't want to jump in and ask questions that mess up your whole order of things.
So basically, there is a genetic link. It is not necessarily consistent with everyone. And so while we have seen that if a parent has high intelligence, a child is likely to have high intelligence, but it's not guaranteed. And that, again, has to do with a lot of different factors like access to education, enrichment, things like that. But there have been some heritability findings of intelligence over time. I'm not
Is that
deep dives
on a scale though? Like, so parents who have a low intelligence are more likely, and then parents who have an average intelligence are more likely to have average, or is this sort of only come through in these very high?
So the study that I have is just talking about average to high intelligence. I'm not talking necessarily about low intelligence. That's like a whole different animal and what goes into that, because
right.
A lot of times when someone has a lower intelligence or an extremely low intelligence, they could have other genetic factors, other things.
Right. Other medical problems, things like that.
And again, I cannot emphasize enough, a lot of performance on IQ, which I'll go into in a minute, it is heavily based on your access to education, unfortunately.
So the testing is sort of biased toward
definitely
education.
And for a long time, the testing was biased towards white males. There's been some changes, and we've done some other studies, and so we're getting better in that field. But traditionally, IQ was not always as should we say diversity considered as it should have been. And then also, just to throw out there, people who are listening and thinking about IQ, we don't know what President Lincoln's IQ was because we didn't have IQ tests back then. There's a lot of things are saying like, oh, here's the IQ of all the presidents. IQ testing was really not created until around the 70s by the military. I'm not going to go into the whole history of it, but when, be a discerning consumer, and when you hear things, kind of question, fact check what you can, but also, do you really care what Lincoln's IQ was? I don't. It doesn't.
No, I think it's more what you do in life than what your number is, right?
Yeah, definitely. But I know that that's something that always comes up is every time we have a new president, oh, their IQ is this. Well, there's more to being.
I could say so many things, right?
Head of government, or
I'm not gonna say it. I'm not gonna say it, right?
I'm not even going into that. I'm just saying that IQ is one factor of a person, and there's multiple factors that lead to success. And I think Morgan is a perfect example of that. Is she had a wonderful IQ, but she really wasn't able to hold a job before this position. Spoiler alert: she gets to stay on with the LAPD. It's very sweet. I can't wait to see what season 2 does. I will say, it was a very long first season, 13 episodes, which I feel like is a lot because they're all about an hour each.
Right.
So I was like super focused for maybe the first like 8 episodes, and then I started to be like, I can't brain anymore. I'm not like Morgan. I can't. So I'll go back and revisit the end of them. But all the episodes are really fun and lighthearted, but also talk about both the strengths and the weaknesses that Morgan has in her life based on this giftedness that she has. So one question that a lot of people ask about memory, because I said before that she has a photographic memory. There's a difference between an eidetic memory and a photographic memory. Do you know what the difference is?
I do not. I just know I don't have a photographic memory.
So basically, long story short, a photographic memory is the ability to recall where you saw something. So, for example, I feel like I have a slight amount of this, clearly not, genius level. But when I'm thinking about photographic memory, I feel like, oh yeah, I read that book and it was like on the bottom of the right-hand page. It was like information was there somewhere. Like I can remember where I saw it. Where an eidetic memory is where you vividly recall all of the details of something that you've been exposed to after a very brief amount of time.
So no, I'd be more, the photo. If that's the case, then I'm more photo than the other, because I'll tell my kids, they're like, I can't find this. I'm like, it's here on this shelf, down here, over there, but.
Right. Yeah.
But I do not have vivid details. Like I could watch a movie or read a book and have such the gist of it and I enjoyed it, but I cannot tell you the plot word for word. Like I cannot.
Right. The interesting thing is that eidetic memory seems to be more common in children and kind of drops off after time. So there's lots of ideas about why this may be happening. It could be just because your brains are developing and so you're holding on to information more like a sponge. And then once, you're growing, there's too much information or there's more information that you're able to kind of take in and take out. But that's just a colloquialism, like having that sort of memory doesn't necessarily make you good or bad at something. It's just a skill that someone may have. And I only talked about it because I remember in Big Bang Theory, Sheldon talks about having an eidetic memory. So it's like, okay, we'll talk about what the difference is. So a high potential intellectual, there's lots of different terms. A lot of the references that I found for this came from France. So I don't know if that's where they originated or if this is just where we have a lot of those terms. We don't necessarily speak about things in those terms here in the US. But in HIP, high intellectual potential, or also being called gifted, which I know here in the US, that's a numbers game. That's based on the percentages of how you score on certain things in school. And then they use the term zebra, which I don't really understand. No one clarified where that term came from or what it means, but all three of those things are used interchangeably in France. And they're not used in a negative way, which is what they're called.
Okay.
And so a high intellectual person is someone who's considered to have neuroatypical functioning, or neurodivergent, as we call it here. And there's 2 types of high potential. So high potential intellectual or high emotional potential. So high potential intellectual is someone who has an IQ above 130. So just to kind of backtrack IQ, I've got my paper in front of me.
Let's go through the basics.
Basics, because I do this every single day, so I forget that people don't remember. So let me read the exact rest.
Yeah, I'm like average-ish is around 90 to 110, I think. Is that correct?
So an average IQ is 90 to 109. High average is 110 to 119. Superior is 120 to 129. And very superior is anything over 130. So once you're past 130, we just loop everybody together.
And what is I know you take a test, but Mensa, what's the number?
It has to be 130 or higher.
130 or higher.
Actually, I think it might be 135. I haven't checked it well. But it definitely has to be at least.
That's just essentially a club, right? Like you take a test
Mensa
and you're
is just a club. Once you get one IQ test with it, you pay a fee and you're a member for life, and that's it. You basically get a membership card and you're done.
Did you get any special privileges? Like discounts? I don't know. What do you got?
I don't know about you, but
parties.
Like, in college, I was inducted into Psy-Chi, which is the Psychology Honor Society. That's it. Like you get it right. That you're on it, you can list it in your credentials, but it doesn't necessarily do anything for you.
I think I was in Alpha Eta, whatever the Medical Honor Society is. But
and I don't want to say it doesn't mean anything, but like it's really just an identification. It's something to list on your credentials.
Got it.
To be a part of Mensa. And so those are the levels of IQ. But something I think a lot of people don't understand is that IQ is a concept that is not just one thing. So when we're measuring someone's IQ, there are 5 different areas that we're looking at. And oftentimes when we're testing someone's IQ, that number that we're giving, that 125 or 130 or whatever, that's their overall IQ. But those 5 different areas may vary somewhat. They can vary significantly for some people. But even those folks who are falling into that high average range, they can still have some variation in those areas. So those areas of intelligence are verbal comprehension. That's exactly what it sounds like. The ability to understand verbal knowledge, to use verbal reasoning to problem solve. Visual spatial reasoning. So that's the ability to look at visual details, to understand spatial relationships, geometry, things like that. Fluid reasoning. So that's the ability to understand concepts and relationships between things, both visual or verbal, and then to use reasoning to identify and apply rules to something similar. So that would be like, okay, here's this puzzle. These are the rules for this. Now what do we do for this one?
Got it.
And then working memory. So that's the ability to hold verbal or auditory information in mind and then to manipulate that. So the best example of what working memory is for most people is if someone tells you their phone number out loud. You have to remember those 7 numbers and you have to remember them and then be able to use them. There's a reason that phone numbers are only 7 numbers.
Oh.
Because that is what most people can remember accurately.
Interesting.
Numbers.
Okay.
Once we add an area code or a country code or things like that, things can get a little hairy, but that's why phone numbers are 7 numbers.
But nobody needs that anymore because they're all programmed into our phones. That skill is lost.
And then the final part of intelligence is processing speed. So that's the ability to process information quickly. So those are when you're doing an IQ test, anything that is timed to see how much time it takes you to problem solve. So that's what IQ is. And then obviously, like we said, if you are high potential, your IQ is very high. There can be correlations with high IQ and other issues, like what we used to call Asperger's, which we now call autism spectrum disorder, with low support needs. We no longer use high functioning as a term. And then high emotional potential is someone who has superior emotional intelligence. So there are emotional intelligence skills. I'm not going to dive down that rabbit hole because there's a lot of it. But high emotional potential is someone who has really good interpersonal skills, has a strong sense of emotional sensitivity, empathy, understanding of other people's emotions, as well as their own emotions. So someone who's hypersensitive, which sometimes can be confused with high emotional potential, does not necessarily have HEP. If you're hypersensitive, you're just picking up on stuff. You may not always understand it or know what to do with it or be able to process it.
Right.
And so, like I said, giftedness, or this term zebra, which no one can tell me what it's supposed to allude to. I don't know, maybe zebras are super smart. I know that zebras, some animal in the African plains does not get anxiety. I think it's zebras, but that's a whole different story.
How would they know that?
They measured cortisol and stress.
Okay.
But that's a different story for another time. So that is what high intellectual potential is. And then, wait, maybe I did just find, let's see. Okay, so another term that they use in France is precocious. Here we use precocious in a different way, so I'm not going to get into that. But I'm sure you've heard of precocious puberty or things like that. So we don't use that term here in the US because we use it for something else. Okay, here, the term zebra was coined by psychologist Jean Sinaud-Frochin, and it's never been used in science. In social networks, it's been used to describe a mixture of hypersensitivity, anxiety, and emotional difficulties, which does not correspond with high intellectual potential. So maybe that is something more like what Morgan is going through, where she has the high intelligence, but she has this other sensitivity, she's picking up on these emotional things, but doesn't know necessarily how to process them as well as she does intellectual stuff. And then this article is really interesting. It has a lot of like myths about high potential. And so there'll be a link for that in the show notes because I don't want to go down too much of a rabbit hole on it. So let's see what else I did. I talked about that. So there is a link to an article about the correlation between high intellectual potential and what this article calls high functioning autism. It's an article from 2021, so some of the language around autism is shifting and changing quite often. So here it's not necessarily used to define high functioning versus low functioning. It's to identify their sample. So it would be people who are on the autism spectrum but have maybe this amount of support needs or this amount of deficits. And then just in general here in the US, we talk about giftedness, gifted and talented programs and things like that. So giftedness is when someone can be very smart, but when they're performing in academic things, they are performing at a certain percentage above average. Just like same thing with if someone is considered an intellectual disability, they have to be performing below a certain percentage compared to the normative peers.
So just speaking on the giftedness and things like that. So, academic performance and intelligence are two different things. And sometimes they can go together and both.
And sometimes they go
one, and sometimes they are a discrepancy. And so you can have high intelligence and not test as well or not perform as well on a day-to-day academic basis, or the opposite. The opposite is you have average intelligence, but maybe you work really hard and you persevere past that. Right? Is that
right? And that's a lot of why I see people who come in for testing for ADHD or autism or things like that. Some of that is school-based performance. Like they're not performing as well in school as we think they should be. Or, behaviorally they're fine, but their performance is below average. So what is going on? And so that's why if you're experiencing this, or if you have a child who's experiencing this, it's best to go to a professional and have a full evaluation so you can look at the personal performance that this person is having, what this individual is experiencing, to see if there's a diagnosis. There may not be. Some people just aren't great at tests. That doesn't mean they have a diagnosis. There's all different sorts of things. So, but just so people know, we talked about what a high IQ is, what what Mensa is, and all that stuff. So when we're looking at the other end, an intellectual disability is someone whose IQ is below 70. And so there's this kind of gray space between 70 and 80 where we think someone may have intellectual problems or intellectual concerns, but we're not necessarily diagnosing it as a disability. And so that's why if you have concerns about that, it's best to be evaluated completely.
Right. And when we're looking at
not an online test.
Right. Exactly. By somebody who's experiencing this. And then when we look at for learning disabilities, it's a discrepancy typically between your actual IQ and then that particular area, correct? Like
that IQ, the particular area, but just what also average performance is considered in your context.
Okay. Right. Because and I don't know is this standard across, like 1.5 standard deviations difference is considered like a diagnosis of something like that?
That is how we basically gauge things. It's a little bit of an arbitrary number, but we kind of had to define it some way to allow people to get support and services. So yeah.
Right. I know that in New Jersey, they actually made a law, though, that you can't use discrepancy as the only reason to say that somebody does not have a learning disability and not give them, services. So they have to use that plus their academic performance and what their grades are and all these other things.
Exactly. Which I think anyone who is a professional and who's working in any sort of field, making any sort of diagnosis or helping someone get services, you're never looking at one data point. You should be looking at a collection of data points. So, right. I mean, I feel like that makes sense. I'm glad that it was formally made, because I think this is getting into a little bit more detail than I needed to for this, but schools can do certain type of testing. Other types of testing has to be referred out to a professional, because school psychologists have a different license than a clinical psychologist. Not all of them, but some of them. And so there's a lot of nuances to this that I would just, speak to a professional in your area if you have any questions about them. And then just one other thing I wanted to cover, since we were talking about high potential intellectual, is savantism. And so I personally don't use this term anymore, because I think it's been a lot of associated with people who have severe deficits, but then are really smart in one thing. But that is essentially what a savant is someone who performs exceptionally in a single field, a single area. So someone who's extremely good at mathematics, but nothing else. And
what's the movie?
Terrible and everything else, but everything else is average. But one area is very smart.
What movie is it that's about that? Rain Man.
Rain Man.
I know the movie in my head, but I couldn't come up with the name of it.
Even with that, even the examples they show are not really 100% savantism, because in that movie, you're showing that he has very quick processing speed, the mental math, counting, things like that. But you also have to have good visual spatial processing to do that. Like the example in that is when he drops the matchbox and he tells you exactly how many matches fell out of the box. Well, it's not just about math. It's about looking at it and being able to analyze it and to process it quickly. And so that's not necessarily just one field.
Got it.
But it's a good example for, the general public to be like, that's what that looks like. So I think a clear example of a savant would be, sometimes we'll see people who have had a brain injury and then all of a sudden they can pick up an instrument and play it perfectly. That's more of savantism, where they suddenly have, and savantism isn't always sudden, but you have an exceptional skill in one area. So they have an exceptional skill in music. That would be a better example of it. Should I read that? There's going to be show notes and links, because then it goes down a whole rabbit hole of associations with depression, perfectionism, anxiety, isolation, being twice exceptional. So not going to go into all that. It gets detailed. There's a lot to cover there.
So just if you could define what twice exceptional is, just since we...
So twice exceptional is when someone has... I just closed it. Dang it. Give me a second. I'll bring it back.
Sorry.
There we go. Twice exceptional is, and this is just from Wikipedia, so, take it with a grain of salt, but having read through it, it looks like, and I mean, there's other show notes, it's not just Wiki. I did my clipboard research. But twice exceptional, it was a term coined by James J. Gallagher to denote students who are both gifted and have disabilities. So this is someone who may have gifted learning needs and a learning disability.
Okay.
And so I don't feel like we see that often, or if we do, it's probably overlooked, because I think a lot of times when we're looking at kids who have a disability, there's always a lot of focus on the deficits and not the strengths. And so, I think a lot of us in the field are moving towards a more strength-based approach, which I think is really helpful. But just because you're really great at one thing doesn't mean that you're great at everything. Like I joke and I say, like, I'm smart in some things, but I can't tell you how an airplane works. And I've had it explained to me multiple times. But I literally, like, there's a gun to my head. I'd just be like, well, I don't know.
Yeah, it's so the variation in just brain processing and all of these things and strengths, it is amazing to me. And just even within people we know, who's strong and what. My husband is one of those people who can literally deep dive on a subject and he can tell you how to do it and then learn how to do it himself. Like he's now woodworking because he learned how to do that, and, building a computer and doing 3D printing, like just random things. I'm like, that is just not my thing, but brains are interesting, I tell you.
And just to think about, I mean, we've kind of alluded to it before, but in healthcare, in medicine, there are so many things that could go wrong that just for us to be here and be functioning and be able to talk to each other and have a podcast is a miracle. And then taking into these things like how someone could be gifted or have these strengths, that doesn't mean that covers all aspects of their life. Everyone's a dynamic being, and so you can have both the strengths and the weaknesses.
And then, like you alluded to in the beginning, what their support structure was, what access to learning they had, and things like that too is going to determine that.
And so, like I said, I kind of zoned out the last few episodes of High IQ. Sorry, guys. But at least the episodes that I was like really focused on, they never really talk about Morgan's access to education, but you do see that she's relatively low income, at least to start. Like her her car's in the shop and she can't get it, and they have to walk everywhere, and they steal grocery carts to bring their groceries home. So like they're definitely not in a great place despite her having these extreme skills. And so you don't really know what someone's access has been. Also, there's a lot of allusions to her experiencing trauma. So that can definitely impact your performance. You may have these core, very high intellectual skills, but you may not be performing because there's other things going on.
Got it.
But high IQ, super cute show. Really liked it. It was a great balance between this fun, interesting intellectual thing going on with, who I love a good crime drama.
Yeah.
But there's also some great comedy, some really heartwarming moments. So it's a really good show. I'm glad that it got picked up for a second season. And you guys should give it a watch. It was cute.
Nice.
Now going into it, you'll have a little better understanding of why Morgan is the way she is.
A little extra special.
Yes.
Pretty cool, though. I like it. All right. We made it through episode 10.
We did.
Success. As Borat would say, great success.
Great success.
I'm not going to do the accent.
I've never seen Borat. So.
Oh my goodness. Are you kidding me?
I know.
I swear, like during my wedding, when my husband was like mic'd and he's in the church and he's at the front, like talking to his brother, joking around, and the video guy like could hear everything. And they were saying, him and his brother and George, who were saying all these random Borat quotes. And I think the guy behind the camera was dying, cracking up.
So funny.
That was all cut out of the video, but it was for his entertainment.
I mean, your wedding alone, there are some wild moments. I had a hairpiece that
you did
at one point. Yeah, fun times.
All right, so let's plug our stuff. So socials, we now have Facebook too. I caved and I did that.
That
yeah,
was a surprise. Caved. Thank you.
I was like, all right, let me do that too. So we have a Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, TikTok, Pinterest,
which is probably useless, but I'm still keeping it.
Actually, I'm not going to quote that this is an actual statistic, but somewhere in this podcast Facebook group, they said that Pinterest is the key to the women demographic. So I'm going to say, go for it. So yes, we have that.
We have email. You guys send us an email at medicalmediamixer@gmail.com.
Yes. And emails and all the links are on all our socials for our website. We have a survey. Let us know how we're doing. So follow us, communicate with us. We're here.
Yeah, we're doing it. We've been here for 10 episodes. It's getting lonely. Send us some love.
And stay tuned because we're recording a second one today. So we'll see you on drink 2.
Yeah.
How episode 2 goes.
Episode 2 is going to be awesome. My first drink wasn't strong. So
no, I didn't make mine too strong. All right. So thank you for listening to Medical Media Mixer.
The perfect cocktail.
Cheers. Cheers. With our empty ash drinks.